ask me when it comes to the disappearance of Brian Shaffer. Did he leave of his own accord, or was he the victim of foul play? Through our investigation, we are hoping to find answers to those questions. I am your host, Kelly Bruce, and this is Brian Shaffer, Dead or Alive, Chapter 2, Into Thin Air. Brian Randall Shaffer, a second-year medical student at The Ohio State University, is a missing adult from Columbus, Ohio. Brian was last seen on April 1, 2006 on CCTV outside the Ugly Tuna Saloona at 1:55 a.m. He was 27 years old at the time of his disappearance and would be 40 years old today. Brian is a white male that is approximately 6 foot 2 inches tall and 170 pounds with brown hair and hazel eyes. He was last seen wearing an olive green polo shirt with a long sleeve white shirt underneath, denim jeans, and white tennis shoes. He was also wearing a yellow cancer awareness bracelet. Brian has a black spot on his left iris and a Pearl Jam stickman tattoo on his upper right arm. If you have any information on the disappearance of Brian Shaffer, please contact the Columbus Police Dept at 614-645-4545. When I first heard about Brian's disappearance, everyone knows it was Brian's love of Pearl Jam that drew me in. For most people, though, it is the mystery surrounding the disappearance of Brian Shaffer that draws them in. A man walks into a bar and is never seen again. It sounds like a line to a joke or the performance of a magician, not the real-life disappearance of Brian Shaffer. It baffled me to think someone could just vanish into thin air. I am going to now give you a detailed timeline of events for Brian Shaffer on March 31, 2006 until 1:55 a.m., April 1, 2006. Brian began his evening by having dinner with his father at Outback Steakhouse in Reynoldsburg, Ohio. According to his father, Randy, Brian seemed tired from finals, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. After dinner, Brian went back to his apartment and waited for the arrival of his friend Clint so they could begin their evening. Brian and Clint began their evening by walking to the Ugly Tuna Saloona at approximately 9:30 p.m. At 9:56 p.m., Alexis called Brian. Around 11 p.m., Brian and Clint went to the Short North Tavern. At approximately 11:40, the duo went to Brothers Bar. Around this time, Brian and Clint were joined by a friend of Clint's named Meredith Reed. Meredith then drove the three of them to the Ugly Tuna Saloona, where Clint and Brian began their evening. At 1:55 a.m., Brian is seen on CCTV outside the Ugly Tuna Saloona speaking with two girls later identified as Amber and Brighton. Brian then walks off camera and has not been seen since. Today, Brian Shaffer, Dead or Alive, is going to have our first guest. I figured since we are discussing the final known moments of Brian Shaffer, that we would invite Brighton to the show since she spent the majority of the time at Ugly Tuna Saloona with Brian. The following is a pre-recorded interview between myself and Brighton.
Hi, Brighton, and thank you for joining us on Brian Shaffer, Dead or Alive today.
Hi, I'm glad to be here.
I know that you and I have spoke a few times about Brian's disappearance, but I thought that the listeners would like to hear from you as well. I prepared some questions for you, and if you don't mind, we'll get right into those.
Sure.
So let's go back to March 31st, 2006. How old were you at the time?
I think I was 23 at the time.
Okay. And were you a college student as well?
Yes, I was actually attending Ohio State University.
Okay. So it's Friday night, March 31st, 2006, and it's the start of your spring break. I imagine everyone on campus was going out that night, to celebrate upcoming spring break trips or whatever. You made plans with your friend Amber that night, correct?
Correct.
At that point, had you and Amber been friends for a while?
We had only been friends about a year and a half. We both worked together at Target.
Okay. Was it only the two of you that went out that night?
Right. It was just the two of us.
Okay. And prior to going to the Ugly Tuna Saloona, did you go to any other bars?
I thought about that, and I don't have any memory of going anywhere else before that. I think Ugly Tuna was our our only stop that night.
Okay. I'm going to speed the evening along a little bit. Let's go to 1:15 a.m. Everyone knows this is the time that Brian arrived at the Ugly Tuna Saloona with Clinton Meredith.
Right.
Were you and Amber already at the Ugly Tuna Saloona, or did you arrive after they showed up?
We were already there, actually. We were sitting in bar stools that were closest to the entrance. And Amber was sitting, and I was sitting to the left of her.
Okay. So tell me how you were introduced to Brian.
I actually don't remember really, like, physically being introduced. I think it was more of like a natural thing. Clint was Amber's old teacher's assistant, and so they had run into each other. And like I said, Amber was sitting to my right, so Clint was standing to her right, and they were talking. So Brian was standing right behind Amber and I both. So I think it was just natural that Brian and I just started, communicating.
Okay. And prior to that night, had you ever met Brian, Clint, or Meredith before?
No, I had not.
And you told me that you actually didn't even really speak to Meredith that night, correct?
No, I actually don't even know what she looks like. So I don't think I was introduced to her at all.
Okay. At that point, you personally had a lot to drink, correct?
Right.
In your opinion, based on Brian's actions, would you say that he was drunk?
I think that he was feeling really good. I don't know that he was drunk. I mean, he wasn't falling over or anything. He was being flirtatious. So, I think he was, I think if he had drank any more, it probably could have gotten, he would have been too drunk. But I don't think he was too drunk.
Okay. Would you mind telling me a little bit about your interactions with Brian that night? Like any conversations or just, anything about it?
Sure. The thing with conversations, I don't remember anything we talked about. The evening kind of goes through my head, kind of like a silent movie. I do know that, that the conversation was flirtatious. He was kissing up on my neck. And I took that as a signal. So I put my phone number in his phone and of course gave it back to him. And then when Amber suggested, and he'd offered to walk us to our car, I was excited about that. But other than that, I don't really, remember like anything we talked about.
But Brian didn't end up walking you out to the car. Do you recall why?
Right. Yeah, he did not walk us to our car. I think maybe we got distracted. I don't know. We got out in the lobby. We were talking, and I went back in the bar for a brief moment to go to the restroom. Of course, because after everything we had drank. So I came back, and Amber and I had left. And maybe we decided we didn't need him to. I don't know. I don't know why he didn't walk us to our car.
At 1:55, you're seen on CCTV with Amber and Brian outside the Ugly Tuna Saloona entrance. The three of you walk off camera. Can you tell me what you guys do when you walk off camera?
I've seen that footage so much, and I don't know what we were doing. There wasn't really much for us. There wasn't very far for us to go because at that time there was a wall with a beige door there. So it was just like kind of like a cubby that was dipped in a little bit. And I think maybe we were just trying to get out of other people's way, maybe. But we were just talking, and I noticed that Amber kind of like pushed I think she was just directing me back a little bit. And so I don't know.
Okay. And so before you left, like you said, you went in to use the restroom, and Amber and Brian stayed outside.
Right.
The bar. Right. Okay. So after all of that, and you and Amber go to leave, do you know approximately what time that was?
In my memory, I don't remember, but because how much I've gone over this night with other people and everybody and watching the footage, I know that it was around 1:55.
Okay. You and Amber were in her car, and it was parked in the parking garage, correct?
Right. We were on the first floor.
Okay. And did you and Amber go home when you left the Ugly Tuna Saloon?
I don't remember where we went, but out of curiosity, I think Amber has better memory than I do, and Amber said we went over to her boyfriend's house, Will, at the time.
Okay. Yeah, that's what she told me too, that you guys went to her boyfriend's at the time and you ended up both spending the night there.
Yeah. That was an often occurrence for us. At that time when she was dating him, we went to his house a lot for, parties and just, hanging out. So it was a very common occurrence for her and I to go over there.
Okay. When did you first find out about Brian's disappearance?
It was Monday morning. Amber called me, and it woke me up actually. I was really shocked.
How long after Brian went missing did it take for CPD to speak to you guys?
I really don't think it was more than, I feel like less than a week. I mean, I know it was very soon after. Hurst came to my apartment to interview me, and then not long after that, Amber and I went down to the station and watched the CCTV footage so they could ask us questions about that.
I know you still follow Brian's disappearance and participate on Facebook threads or, just any other threads. I'm sure you have went over every detail of that night on your own and have a lot of different thoughts. Is there anything that you would like to add about that night?
I wish that I remembered more. Actually, I struggled going back to Ugly Tuna after that night. I went back once, and I didn't last very long. I had to leave the bar. It was too hard for me. So,
how long would you say it was after Brian disappeared that you first went back in?
This was 2006. It had to have been a month or so because I moved back to Toledo midsummer, I think.
So I have heard recently that there was an argument between Clint and Brian at the Ugly Tuna Saloon that night. Do you recall any incident such as that?
I do not. I did not see them argue, but also I didn't really see them interact either because the entire time I interacted with Brian, Clint was talking to Amber.
Did Brian speak of any plans that he may have had later that night or anything that you recall like that?
He did not.
You were an employee at Verizon Wireless for a little while. You've probably had some experience with phone calls and different things like that. And one of the things that have always intrigued me the most since Brian has went missing is the pings on his cell phone. With your experience, do you have any opinions on that?
I do. I was at Verizon for about 7.5 years. And for the majority of that, I did technical support. And I did turn in tickets for network problems and things like that. And the only way a phone can communicate with the network and ring is if it's powered on and it'll connect. There's just no way. There was no way that, I guess I could understand it being a glitch if it happened once. But from my understanding, everyone said that Alexis called twice. Am I right?
Well, she called a lot. And
how many times did it ring for her in that same day?
It rang for multiple hours.
Yes.
And it wasn't just her. It was CPD. It was Brian's dad, his family in general. Everyone started calling Brian's phone once they figured out it was ringing.
No way that was a glitch, because that means the phone was on and it communicated with the tower. What does that tell us? It tells us that the phone was on. We don't know if someone found the phone or, if he turned it on or if there was a killer turned it on. But there's, in my opinion, based on my, my experience at Verizon, there's no way it was a glitch.
Recently, I found out from Brian's phone records by going through and putting a name with numbers in 2006 that there were several other people out that night with Brian. And one of them I have actually spoke to, and he told me that it was the first time he met Brian that night because he was in from out of town.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember anyone else being with them or coming up to you guys or anything like that?
No, I thought it was just the three of them. I thought it was just Brian, Clint, and Meredith. And I didn't even really know that Meredith was part of it. So I only heard about Meredith until after the fact.
So you know the podcast is called Brian Shaffer, Dead or Alive. Do you have an opinion one way or another of what you think happened to Brian Shaffer?
I think that there is a large possibility that he's alive. I really think that maybe he snuck out that door, the band went out, and he made it all the way to Wendy's and maybe got picked up there. And I mean, I think that's something. Maybe I'm just praying that he's alive somewhere because, you know, you don't want to hear bad news about somebody that went missing. I really do think that Brian is alive. And maybe that's just, you know, hope that, you know, because he's been missing so long and it's such a, you know, crazy case that, you know, you just really, you know, it's sad, you know, that, you know, his family has gone through so much pain. You really hope he's alive. But really ever since the beginning, I really thought that he was alive because there was no sign at all at the bar. I mean, if he wasn't alive, I feel like they would have found him in that vicinity, or at least, I mean, they did a really thorough search of him.
They did. They did a very thorough search for Brian.
That's why, like, knowing that, knowing that there wasn't really a lot of as many camera footage as we thought there was, I knew they're having a way he slipped out of there. I don't think a long time ago I considered maybe he went through that beige door I'm talking about. But looking now that I've seen the footage again and again, because I didn't realize there were two policemen standing next to us, and there's no way those two policemen would let anybody go through that door.
And let me just clarify, that beige door you're talking about is now the double doors of the office that is there? Is that what you're saying?
So, okay, right now, that actually is now a longer hallway that goes to the doors into those OSU offices. That wall was way closer and had a beige door to the construction at the time.
Okay.
So there wasn't a big hallway like there is now. You know, back then there was construction, so there wasn't a hallway at the time. There was just a wall and a door that went to the construction. And that when we went under the, like you asked me about us going out of camera view,
mm-hmm.
There was only like maybe 2 feet, and then we ran into the wall. Like the wall is like 2 feet from where we were.
Okay. So that makes sense to me. So you would still go out that door to get to like the service elevator and all of that stuff.
Probably. And I never went back there because there was construction, and I'm no rebel. I don't go into doors that aren't meant for me.
I get that. And you know what's funny is when me and Nick talked to Amber, like, gosh, over a year ago, whenever that was, she mentioned that she remembered the door there, and she does know that you could go through it because she said she opened the door and stood there to call her boyfriend because it was too loud one time. Not the night you guys were out, but another time.
Yeah.
So she said she knew that you could open that door and go through it. So I had no clue that the hallway wasn't there. It looked different. John has never even corrected me on that.
Yeah, it wasn't there then. Because there was probably a hallway on the other side and went probably to elevators, because I know that there's elevators there now.
Brighton, I'd like to thank you again for taking time out of your day to speak to us and for helping keep Brian's name out there over the years.
I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to do that.
I again would like to thank Brighton for taking the time to speak with me. We have been communicating for the better part of 18 months, trying to go through the last known moments of Brian Shaffer. However, when you are trying to recall memories from a drunken night 13 and a half years ago, it makes it difficult. Brighton and I have even discussed hypnosis to see if she can recover any memories or conversations from that night. Most of the questions I asked Brighton were obvious. A couple I asked with a hopeful purpose that it would spark a memory. Recently, I have learned several new things about the early morning hours of April 1st, 2006. I knew that Brian and Clint had some arguments during their friendship, one happening a couple of weeks before Brian's disappearance. I did not know that they argued at the Ugly Tuna Saloon on April 1st, 2006 until recently. A witness gave a statement in 2006 saying Brian and Clint were arguing that night. However, with the noise in the bar, the details could not be heard. As we all heard, Brighton was unaware of an argument between the two. I have to ask myself what this argument was about and if it had anything to do with the reason they argued 2 weeks prior. I'm always reaching out to people trying to learn about Brian. A couple of weeks ago, I was able to chat with a close friend of Brian's. We spoke of the things they used to do together as well as things that Brian liked to do. During our conversation, he mentioned that he spoke to Brian the night he disappeared. Of course, that piqued my curiosity, so I began asking questions about their communication. He explained that he had not seen Brian for a while since he had been in Puerto Rico for medical school. He had been talking to Brian that night because Brian was going to have a get-together with friends at his apartment after he got home from the bar. I knew Brian had been in Puerto Rico because of the stuffed animal he brought home for Alexis, but I didn't realize it was a lengthy stay. I asked Brian's friend how long he was in Puerto Rico, and he replied, close to a year. This stunned me, so I reached out to John Hurst and Don Corbett to verify this information. They both agreed it was a lengthy stay, somewhere around 6 months. Still wanting confirmation, I reached out to Tom, who is Alexis's dad. Don Corbett put us in contact with each other about a month ago, and we email back and forth on occasion. I asked Tom when Brian was in Puerto Rico and how long he was there. He replied later that afternoon and told me Brian had been there more than once, both alone and with friends, and in more than one location. We here at Brian Shaffer Dead or Alive have evidence of Brian being in Puerto Rico for at least 1 month in the summer of 2005 for medical school. During my conversation with Brian's friend, I asked him how much time there was between Brian returning from Puerto Rico and him disappearing. He replied, weeks, maybe a couple of months. He also stated this was the reason for Brian planning the after-hours get-together at his apartment on April 1st, 2006. His friend stated, I talked to him and made plans to see him. 2 hours later, he was missing. Here are my thoughts on all the information I have recently learned. Brian and Clint had at the very least a troubled friendship. I have not heard one positive thing about their friendship. However, I have not spoke to Clint, and obviously I cannot speak to Brian. It seems there was always an argument, from arguing on St. Patty's Day to arguing at the Ugly Tuna, and let's not forget that there was some sort of incident that caused them to no longer be roommates. I feel the argument between the two of them at the Ugly Tuna Saloon could be a reason for Brian to want to ditch Clint and Meredith at the end of the night, especially with the get-together already planned at his apartment with his friends. I've always said the window of time for Brian to disappear was so small that he had to want to ditch Clint and Meredith, or someone, by entering the construction site so quickly. After my conversation with Brighton, I now know the distance he had to go to enter the construction site was much shorter than I originally thought. Just a quick slip through a door is all that was needed. The after-party at his apartment tells me Brian had every intention of going home. He was supposed to contact his friends when he made it there, but that call did not come, and in return, his friends did not go to his apartment. I tell everyone that I go back and forth on whether Brian Shaffer is dead or alive daily, and this information made me go back and forth as well. Brian's time in Puerto Rico definitely has me intrigued. I will keep looking for answers and address some of this more in depth on Brian Shaffer Dead or Alive, Chapter 3, The Inside Track. Amber and Brighton. Brian then walks off camera and has not been seen since. The next part of the show is going to be a previously recorded interview I did with Sergeant John Hurst.
Hi, John, and welcome to Brian Shaffer Dead or Alive.
Hi, Kelly. Thanks for having me.
So you've been working on Brian's disappearance since day one, and even though you're retired now from CPD, you still continue to investigate his disappearance. Why don't you tell all the listeners about your new venture?
Oh, absolutely. Since I retired, I've started my own private investigation security company. It's the PAL Detective and Protection Agency. The website for that is paldetective.com. And part of the reason I did that was I know with a lot of missing person cases and different investigations, there's only so much police departments can do because of manpower. And a lot of times, they exhaust every avenue that they can get involved with and chase down. And at some point, 5 more cases come in. And I think it's important to have another option out there for people to turn to assist in looking for their missing.
I agree with that. Okay, as we've discussed before, I want to go through Brian's disappearance and start at the beginning. So let's go back to Monday, April 3rd, 2006, when the police report was filed. Tell me what you, as the lead detective, started doing.
Well, once the report come in, the initial officer started looking at the homeless shelters, hospitals, the typical places that you would look for somebody that may have gone missing in a situation similar to Brian's. Once we checked all those places and we didn't discover any evidence that Brian had been at any of those locations, we started getting a little bit deeper into the investigation. We went to the Ugly Tuna Saloon, which was a Southgate company there, was in charge of the security cameras. We had them pull all the security camera video that they had. And that was a big task for them because they had several cameras, and we ended up with, I can't remember the exact amount, but I want to say about 15 discs of camera footage from the Southgate people. We also started talking to the family, trying to find out what other type of information we may have from them that could help with the investigation. We started doing a canvas, door to door, knocking on doors, asking people, if they'd heard or seen anything that morning. We had at one point the dive team, we had bike patrol, we had horse patrol, checking different locations along the Olentangy River. Down in that location, we contacted the phone company and started putting a ping out on his phone to see if we could possibly find a location through the cell phone that he had. It was just astronomical, the resources that we actually used in the beginning for this.
It definitely sounds like it. So we have a pretty good understanding of Brian's timeline of events on March 31st to April 1st, 2006. However, we know nothing after 1:55 a.m. on April 1st. I want to talk about the Ugly Tuna Saloon and start with the CCTV footage. Tell me about the process that CPD used to go through the footage.
Well, there's a couple different processes we used. Once we got the footage, I assigned a detective to review all the footage, and he actually did some at the office there. He would take it home, and he would connect a computer with the footage into his projection screen, and he actually put it on his basement wall, made it life-size, and he went through all the footage and documented people coming and going. There was a lot of man-hours put into just reviewing the footage and documenting all the people going into and out of the area.
Okay, and that was Detective Edwards, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Can you describe for us the exits on the second floor of the Ugly Tuna and the cameras they each had?
Yes. On the second floor, up by the escalators, there was a camera that actually shot down the escalators. Behind that camera, there was a stairwell and an elevator, and that went down into the service area for all the restaurants and things on the first floor. Also down there, the back part of the building was under construction. They were putting in some type of a food store. I can't remember the name of it now. But the floor was all dug up. There was a mound of dirt. It was just, I mean, typical construction of a brand new building is basically what it looked like. About the only thing they had installed at that time was the elevator shaft. They didn't have the elevator in there yet for the upcoming business. They had plywood locked with a chain and a lock at the exits in the construction site. It would be easy for somebody to get into that area. There was no barrier from the service entrance. And why anybody would go through there, I mean, it would be kind of treacherous a little bit, especially if you'd have been drinking. But it's not at all impossible for that to have happened.
So you say all dug up and there was a hole. How big would you say that the hole was that they had dug? And tell me what you guys did to search down there.
Well, the hole wasn't very deep. It was what they did is they dug out an area for the elevator shaft, and it was probably I don't know what typical size of an elevator. They can range in different sizes, but it was probably maybe a 6x6 area, and the hole might have been about 4 foot deep. So it really wasn't that deep where the hole was. And again, we searched the area down there. We had cadaver dogs come in and go through the building, and primarily with the construction area. It was kind of a mess down there. It really wasn't. There was no floor yet, and the terrain was, like a dirt floor, and it was uneven, unlevel, that type of a thing. And if you pushed on the doors, you could probably squeeze in or out of the wooden doors that they had up. So it wouldn't be impossible for somebody to get out or in, but it'd take a little bit of an effort. The other camera that they had was on what they called the emergency exit. And the way the doors were set up and the cameras, if somebody opened the door, the camera would pan to the emergency exit. And going through the footage, what it appeared to happen was the camera had been overridden by possibly one of the security guards, because it appeared like it was going to start to scan to the door and then was taken away. But we talked to the security people at the Ugly Tuna, and they said they had somebody stationed at the exit and nobody went up or down to go out that way. So we're not sure why the camera did what it did at that particular moment.
Okay. And if Brian was downstairs in the construction area, were there ways for him to get out of the building?
Yeah, one of the ways, and I think there's been a lot of chat about the service exit. There's a hallway that runs behind the businesses down there, and that had a camera, and that led to the loading dock area where the dumpsters were in the loading dock. All of that was on camera and was reviewed, and at no time did we see Brian on any of those videos. The doors to the business, some of them are kept open while they're open, so he could have walked through one of the doors and walked out a front door without anybody really paying attention to him. It's that time of night, it's busy, a lot of people moving around. That's a possibility. He also could have squeezed through the wooden doors and got out without being picked up on camera. The cameras on that side at that particular time would pan from one direction to the other, and they weren't set up to pick up any motion at all. There was a camera over at the Wendy's at the time that was not functioning, so we weren't able to gain any footage from the Wendy's there. Detective Edwards did go up and down High Street looking for additional cameras, and if he located an active camera, he went in and requested the footage for that as well. So a lot of the footage, like I said, that we went through took a lot of time, and we didn't just go through it once. We went through it numerous times, obviously, to try to catch every little nook and cranny that we could possibly pick up.
Okay. And you mentioned that the back doors of businesses, is this businesses that were open and operating inside the Gateway complex? Yes. Some of the businesses were open at that particular time of night, getting ready to close. So, it is possible that he slipped through there again, but there was no camera footage that picked him up doing that as well. Okay. In your opinion, with everything that you and CPD did during the searches at the Ugly Tuna Saloon, do you think it's possible that he is still somewhere in that construction site? No, absolutely not. I mean, we went through the entire building from the roof all the way down, checked every corner, utility closets. We even had maintenance come in and remove utility doors that were screwed into different places to gain access to, like the electrical wires, the plumbing and stuff. I mean, that building was searched extremely well, and there's just no way. The other thing of that is, had he been in there somewhere at some point, I think somebody would have noticed, something that would have indicated there was a body there. And, we would have been alerted. But again, we went through every stitch and corner of that building that we could possibly think of. Okay. Since we are discussing searches, can you tell me about any other searches that you guys did in the first month? Well, again, we searched along the Olentangy River, the bike pass. We did go check his home out, his apartment, to obviously see if anything had occurred there. There was a couple tips that came in that we went and checked some buildings and different things that we thought. The unfortunate thing with a lot of the tips that we got, we didn't get an exact building, so the areas that we go check and the buildings we check were just in a certain, like a block area, and so we checked everything in that area that we possibly could, and I mean, there was a lot of different things that went on, and I don't have a list in front of me of everything, all the searches we did, but probably the biggest ones were the canvassing, where we went around the neighborhood looking, checking dumpsters, and then along the Olentangy River area. Okay. I know you touched on this a little bit earlier when you were talking about everyone that you guys spoke to, but who all that Brian knew did the Columbus Police Department interview in the days and weeks following his disappearance? Well, we interviewed well over 100 people with this case. Obviously, we started with the employees who were working that night at the Ugly Tuna Saloon. We interviewed family members, friends, the two girls that he was talking to there. At the top of the stairs, we interviewed them. We interviewed a couple people that through the videos, we were kind of interested in, and one of them was like the orange shirt guy, we called him, because he was wearing an orange shirt. We interviewed him. I mean, like I said, it was well over 100 people that was interviewed for this. Okay. So the orange sweater guy, it was just his activities that night that made you guys want to question him? Yeah, he was just kind of hanging out in the area, and what we ended up finding out, he was a taxi driver, and he was just waiting for his fare to come. And
when he dropped off, he would come back and he just liked hanging out in the area until he got another call. But yeah, it was his activity, just kind of hanging out, not really talking to anybody, just watching people coming and going, and that drew our attention to him.
Okay. So about a month after Brian went missing, his apartment was broken into. Tell the listeners a little bit about that, such as anything that was missing and anything that CPD did to determine who broke into his apartment, or that it wasn't Brian, I should say.
Well, all break-ins are handled by our burglary department section, and they handled the investigation. There was no indication that Brian was there when they completed their investigation, and they were unable to determine who might have broken into the apartment. And without Brian being there, it appeared nothing was missing. So it was kind of a weird situation that occurred, and it may have just been somebody who's seen it on the news and went in and was looking for maybe some quick cash or something, and something that wouldn't be able to be tied to them and get out. So
I think it was like a TV or a DVD player or something like that, and some DVDs that was actually what was determined missing, correct?
Yeah. Other than that, that was it.
Okay. Do you believe that the break-in had anything to do with Brian's disappearance at all?
No, I don't. Like I said, I think it was a situation of opportunity where somebody may have seen the flyers or something on the news and speculated that it'd probably be an easy, quick grab-and-go situation without anybody being home.
Okay. What personal items do we know for sure that Brian had in his possession on April 1st, 2006?
Well, he had the clothes he was wearing and his wallet. That's pretty much about it. I mean, he was out, had the basics with him, and, when you're going out to have a good time, you're not carrying a lot, so.
Right. So we know the phone and then his wallet. Do we know if he had any keys or anything like that?
Keys?
Yeah.
He had the keys to his apartment on him, but other than that.
Okay. Since we've talked about his phone a couple times, I want to discuss that a little bit. In September, and 6 months after Brian went missing, his phone began ringing again. Prior to this, was there any activity or pings on his phone?
Well, we did have the phone ping for a while, and basically what a ping is there's a signal sent to the phone, and the phone, and it'll respond with requested data. And back then, GPS really wasn't as big as it is now, so a lot of the pings that we did back then would give us a wide range of area. If you look at how accurate cell phone pings were back then, a phone could be up to 20 miles away when it pings, when it connects with a tower, and it could actually get a signal from 3 different towers in the area, and it can try to triangulate it. But usually what we go with is the strongest signal is usually where the phone is closest to that tower. And we did get a couple pings back then, a couple areas that we checked. One was out on the west side. We went out there and checked an area, and then there was another one down on, I believe it was Kinney Road and around Lane Avenue. Detective Edwards and myself went down and we checked that area to see if we could locate, anything that would be useful in the investigation. So, yeah, there was a couple pings that we had. Again, we don't know how accurate they were back then because the technology wasn't as good as it is now. So, we went with what we had at the time.
Okay. So were any of these pings from the Saturday or Sunday after Brian went missing?
What we believe, and it's kind of difficult when we talked to the phone company and they were relaying information to us from their engineer who looked into it. What we believe was on the evening, the morning when Brian went missing, that for some reason the phone might have been turned off, the battery went dead, there was no connection to it at all. And when we got these pings, that's what kind of got everybody's attention, because obviously we're thinking, well, maybe the phone was turned on, maybe somebody found it. Yeah, I mean, all these things are going through your mind as to what it could be. So we went and checked the areas out where the pings were located. And again, unfortunately, the technology back then it wasn't as good as it is now. And even then, there was a little bit of speculation as to, well, did the phone get turned on? Was it the phone? Was it something else? And at this point, we believe that there was two pings, and we went and checked it out.
So these were not necessarily usage pings, but more the phone communicating with the cell tower? Correct.
What a lot of people don't realize is your cell phone, if it's on, is constantly updating its location with the towers. And I want to say it's at least every 30 minutes, if there's no phone activity, it'll connect to the closest tower. But when the ping sends a signal out and then the phone responds, that's kind of what got everybody's attention, was a little bit, well, was the phone on? Was it a glitch in the system? It's, like I said, unfortunately, technology back then isn't what it is today. I mean, compared to what we can do or law enforcement can do with tracking phones now.
Okay. So did the phone ping at all in September when it started ringing again?
Well, we did contact the phone company, and the explanation that they gave us was if a tower is overloaded and they're having a lot of calls going through a particular tower at that time, and whatever tower the phone had connected to last, whether it was on or off, is where the signal would go. And what they explained to us was what could have happened with that caused it to ring a little longer instead of going directly to voicemail was the tower that it was relaying to had to jump to another tower, which caused a little bit of a delay and made the phone ring, and it appeared that the phone was on. Again, that's speculation. We're not sure if that explanation, we have to go with what the phone company tells us at that time. So we believe that it was probably that situation, but again, there was no way to verify that other than what they were telling us.
Okay. And these signal pings, that's how you triangulated the signal and determined that the area on Scioto Darby Creek Road needed checked?
Correct. We took the information, the cell towers and different things that we received, and was able to get, like I said, the area, it's going to be a broad area, so we went out and checked that area because of the pings.
Okay. So, my opinion on all of this is that either Brian or someone turned on his phone after that weekend that he went missing. What's your opinion?
I don't do opinions. And I laugh because when I'm talking to different people, and they always want to know what my opinion is, my thought is based on the evidence that we've collected and the data and the information that we received from the phone company. Is it possible that the phone was turned on? Absolutely. Is it possible it jumped from tower A to tower B and made it appear the phone was on? That's another possibility. My answer to that is I really can't say one way or the other. Other than, both are a probability.
Okay. Besides the phone, has there been any other activity for Brian, such as credit history, job applications, or medical treatment?
No, there's none that we could ever find. The unfortunate thing with his credit card, it had been deactivated shortly after he went missing. So had it been used since it was deactivated, it wouldn't have showed up or registered. As far as the medical, like I said, we checked a lot of different hospitals and different things, not just in the Columbus area, but around Central Ohio. And we weren't able to come up with anything where he'd been treated anywhere for anything. So I don't want to say everything led to a dead end. We were able to rule out a lot of things, and that was some of the things that we were able to rule out.
Okay. And just to clarify, it was his dad, Randy, that turned off all of his credit cards and all of that?
Yeah, he was afraid somebody might have gotten a hold of them and used them. So he had them deactivated.
Okay, so if Brian was alive, he would have, or at that time, if he was alive, he would have had no way of supporting himself, basically, that we know of?
Well, not through the usual means that we would think of. Obviously, if he just wanted to disappear, he probably had a plan that how he's going to support himself.
Okay. Okay, so there's one name that always comes up in Brian's disappearance, and that's Clint Florence. Tell me about your interactions with Clint and his participation in helping find Brian in the beginning.
Well, Clint obviously was one of the last people to see Brian that evening. So, we brought him in. We talked to him. He sat down. He gave us an interview and answered all our questions and was really cooperative in the beginning. Then obviously at some point we started asking more questions with different people, and Clint was one of them. And at which time he thought it would be better to contact an attorney, and he contacted an attorney, and based on his attorney's recommendations, he pretty much stopped talking to us.
Okay, so you guys didn't talk to him at all after he obtained an attorney?
No, we did not.
Okay. I've been told by a friend of Brian's and Alexis's dad and Don Corbett that CPD took Clint before a grand jury. Is that true? And if so, what was the outcome?
Well, we did have a subpoena issued for him to come down to the grand jury. And, again, he came down with his attorney. The attorney spoke with the prosecutor at the time with the case and came back and said that his client would not be speaking with the grand jury.
I'm going to pause for a second from my interview with John. I'm not going to lie, this causes so many questions for me. Early on, I was told that Meredith gives Clint an ironclad alibi. However, recently, I received a statement Meredith gave to someone, and I would like to pause and read this to you. Here's my chronology, as I recall it, for the weekend of April 1st through April 2nd, 2006. April 1st, 2006, 12 a.m. Receive a call from Clint and offer to pick him and Brian up in downtown Columbus. 12:30 a.m. Pick Clint and Brian up on Vine Street by the North Market. proceed to drive towards the Ohio State University campus, and park in the garage by the Ugly Tuna. After Clint and Brian decide they want to go to the bar. Around 1, Brian disappears and shortly thereafter reappears, coming into the bar from the entrance at the top of the escalator. 1:30ish. Brian walks away from Clint and I and goes in the direction of the opposite corner from the entrance of the bar. Closer to 2. After talking to Clint while sitting at the bar, we realize that we do not see Brian anywhere. Clint and I proceed to walk through the bar several times and check the restrooms to look for Brian. When we could not find him, we each called him. I left a message telling Brian to give me a call if he needed a ride home. Clint and I walked to my car in the parking garage and went back to Clintonville, to the house that Clint was house-sitting at the time. Around 10 a.m. Saturday morning, April 1st, 2006. I drive Clint back to his car at Brian's apartment, and we both drive back north of campus. Neither one of us went to Brian's door to check on him. I went back to my apartment off of Morris Road, and Clint went back to the house in Clintonville. Later on Saturday, I went to work out, either to the gym or Sharon Woods. Saturday evening, maybe around 9, Clint came over to my apartment, and we watched a movie or TV for a couple hours. 11 p.m., Clint left. Sunday afternoon, April 2nd, 2006. I went to the gym, and Clint called me asking for the police station phone number. At this point, he had heard from Alexis, and they were worried about Brian. I gave him the number and proceeded to call the local hospitals looking for patients under Brian's name, and also ask if anyone without ID had been admitted. Sunday around 3 or so, I went shopping at a store off Sawmill Road and called my mother to tell her that nobody had heard from Brian since I had last seen him on Friday night. Sunday evening, I was home. I might have spoke to Clint at some point later in the evening, but didn't hear anything until the next day, when it became more apparent that perhaps something was wrong and Brian might not be okay. We thought he would be home by Monday because he was supposed to leave for vacation, as I recall. Throughout the first week he was missing, we all thought he might just have left for a week, and would be back by the time classes started the following week. I will leave it up to everyone to decide whether that is an ironclad alibi or not. Now, back to my interview with John Hurst.
So I'd like to discuss what we know about Brian the person and his relationships with his family members and friends. My reason for this is because I don't think the picture that has been painted is completely accurate. I've heard many times his relationship with his father was strained. Is that something you have heard as well or witnessed?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I believe Randy loved his son. And as in some situations with fathers and sons or daughters, relationships get strained. And, the information we got led us to believe that Brian was really close to his mother and interacted with her a lot more frequently than he would with his dad. And, it's just different situations that, for whatever the reason being, that, he didn't feel as comfortable dealing with his dad as he did with his mother.
Okay. I've been told that there was a disagreement between Randy and Brian about the life insurance that Brian was going to receive from the passing of his mother. Do you know if that's true?
Well, Brian met Randy for dinner that night, and we obviously aren't privy to the conversation that they had. We did get information through the investigation that there was a disagreement with the life insurance policy with Derek and Brian and Randy, and Randy was under the impression that they were getting more than they were supposed to. But as far as what Randy and Brian talked to specifically that night, we really couldn't say.
Okay. Is it true that Renee was supporting Brian financially as well as paying for his education to become a doctor?
Yeah, what we pretty much learned was a lot of the payments that were being made for Brian was coming through his mother. And, she gave him a lot of support because she was wanting him to pursue his dream.
Okay. Is it also true that Randy decided to cut Brian off financially after Renee passed?
Well, again, we really don't know what Randy and Brian talked about that night. I know there's been speculation over the years that was part of the conversation. But, again, there's no way to really know what they discussed that evening.
So if this is true, then Brian would have been on his own to pay for his day-to-day expenses and his education then. Yeah.
If that speculation or rumor that's been circulating is true, then, yeah, he would have been on his own to pay for the rest of his college and apartment and different things.
Okay. I've been told that Brian suffered from depression and at one point was on Prozac. Is that true?
We did find out that, yes, that he, had went through some depression and at one time was on, I believe it was Prozac. Again, at the time of his disappearance, though, it didn't appear, even with his mother's death, that he was suffering from depression again. He seemed upbeat from everybody we were speaking with, or at least that's what they were, leading us to believe at the time. Yeah, that is true that he at one point was doing that. Yeah.
Okay. I've been told that Brian was struggling with his sexuality and had at least one bisexual encounter. Do you know if this is true?
Again, that's a rumor and speculation. I don't know for a fact that he was struggling with that. Through the investigation, there was some speculation again that was brought up by other people that we had interviewed, different things, that could be a possibility. But as far as actual, still a little bit of speculation on that.
Okay. So we all know that Brian was dating Alexis at the time of his disappearance, and it's been rumored that a proposal may happen when they went on their spring break trip. Is there any truth to that, of a possible proposal?
Well, that's what we were told, that he was going to propose to her in Florida over spring break at that particular time.
Okay. I know from just my communication with Tom and everything, which is Alexis's dad, that he thinks that was more just a rumor that was started, that he didn't think that they were quite there yet and ready for a proposal, or at least he didn't think Brian was.
Yeah, that's a good possibility. Like I said, through the course of the investigation, interviewing different people, there were some people who were under the impression that that's what was going to happen. We never located an engagement ring or anything, and to our knowledge, none was purchased. So. Okay.
I want to go back to Clint for a minute and the relationship that he and Brian had. In my opinion, it seemed a little troubled with all of the arguments that they always had. Do you know the reason that Clint and Brian quit being roommates after a short amount of time?
No. Again, we are only getting one side of this with Brian being gone. And there was really no good reason given to us why they stopped being roommates. But, that can only be answered by two people, and one of them's, not around right now. So.
Okay. Tell me about the Ohio State game where Brian got punched.
Well, basically, what we found with that a group of them had been walking down the street. Somebody in the group made a comment to another group from the other opposite team, and which led to Brian getting punched in the face because they believed he was the one that made the comment.
Okay, and I only asked about this because so many people rumor that either Clint punched him or he was punched because of Clint. Do you know that to be true, or was Clint with him?
I believe Clint was in the group that night. But as far as the assault, it was somebody in another group had supposedly threw the punch.
Okay. So I know that Clint and Brian had an argument on St. Patrick's Day. Can you tell me what happened there?
Well, basically what we were told is they had a disagreement inside one of the bars, and Brian left and went back to his apartment. I believe Meredith left a short time later and went over to Brian's apartment, and then shortly, sometime after that, Clint went over there, and they were all three over at the apartment. Don't know what the argument was about. It seems like after they got back to out of the club or bar, wherever they were at, things kind of settled down and went back to where they were.
Okay. There was also an argument between Brian and Clint at the Ugly Tuna Saloon on the night Brian disappeared as well. Do you know what that argument was about?
No, we were told that they had an argument, but with the noise in the background, the couple of people who were around them at the time said they were unable to hear what the argument was about, but they did have some sort of a disagreement.
Okay. And who reported that argument?
I want to say, if memory serves me correctly, I think it was either Meredith or one of the other two girls, Brighton.
I actually asked Brighton that, and she said that it wasn't her, so I'm guessing that it was Meredith then.
Okay.
Okay, so I know that you let the facts lead you, and you don't do opinions, you do thoughts, and you never give an answer on which way you lean when it comes to Brian Shaffer's disappearance. But the podcast is called Brian Shaffer, Dead or Alive. Which way do you lean more towards, Brian being alive or Brian being deceased?
Well, I can articulate both situations. I'll tell you what I've always told the media. I don't believe it was a suicide. Most people who commit suicide want to be found. They don't want to be left laying somewhere. Was he abducted? Everything that we've looked at so far doesn't give us an indication that he was abducted. And then, could he have left on his own? Absolutely. He had a lot going on. Death of his mother, pressure, possibility of thinking about getting engaged, college exams, all kinds of things going on. He may have just said, hey, I'm out, and walked away. I've had people ask me, what do you think he has amnesia? Could something happen to him where he could have amnesia? And that's another possibility. So do I think he's dead or alive? I think the investigation, from what we learned over the years, there's a strong possibility that he could still be alive.
I'm going to stop the interview here, but you will hear more from John Hurst on the second part of this episode, Leads and Tips. Typically, I'd put a summary here of everything that we learned. However, I'm going to wait until next week when we finish up the second part of my interview with John. Brian Randall Shaffer, a second-year medical student at The Ohio State University, is a missing adult from Columbus, Ohio. Brian was last seen on April 1, 2006 on CCTV outside the Ugly Tuna Saloon at 1:55 a.m. He was 27 years old at the time of his disappearance and would be 40 years old today. Brian is a white male that is approximately 6 foot 2 inches tall and 170 pounds, with brown hair and hazel eyes. He was last seen wearing an olive green polo shirt with a long sleeve white shirt underneath, denim jeans, and white tennis shoes. He was also wearing a yellow cancer awareness bracelet. Brian has a black spot on his left iris and a Pearl Jam stickman tattoo on his upper right arm. If you have any information on the disappearance of Brian Shaffer, please contact the Columbus Police Dept at 614-645-4545. You can follow Brian Shaffer Dead or Alive on Facebook,